So I'm Lark Articus. I'm with the Working Lands Program in the Upper Willamette Soil and Water Conservation District, and I'm here to talk about soils today. Except now mine is not going to progress. Is it progressing for anybody?
No,
You guys
it's
wouldn't
definitely
believe that we did do a tech run through before we started this.
We sure did, and it worked fine.
Hold on just a second. Sorry, folks.
No worries.
it's in the stars.
How about now?
We see the first slide.
You see the second slide?
Yes.
Excellent. So I just wanted to start real quick and ask you guys how you've interacted with soil today. If you can take a moment to just pop in the chat some ways that you've interacted with soil today. I think Alex is going to read those off for me, so I'll give you a few minutes to pop some thoughts in there.
Vanessa ate an apple.
That's a good one.
Thought about Jessica thought about the native plants I need to get in the ground.
Hmm.
Kelsey checked how thirsty their house plants were, and
Nice.
Poppy moved around soil in a cactus.
Nice. Yeah, those are all great examples. Vanessa got really to the heart of it right away with the eating an apple thing. Because I was going to say, I think it's probably safe to assume that most of us have eaten today. Most of us have gotten probably dressed in some capacity today. Um, and soil is really the foundation for everything. So all of the food that we eat, a lot of the fibers that make up our clothes are, we have them because of soil. And my slides have stopped progressing on my end. Have they stopped progressing for you all as well again?
They have indeed.
Hey.
There we go.
Okay. All right. We'll try not to jinx it. So, soil is the foundation of a lot of what we're doing in life, but what is it made of? It's mostly made up of a mineral element, which on like the most basic level is crushed up rock, and then there's some water in there, there's air, there's a little bit of organic matter, and there is also a whole soil microbiome, so a bunch of little microbes crawling around in there in their habitat. When we're talking about the mineral layer of soils, when we get down to it, that's the soil particles. There are three different types of particles: sand, silt, and clay. The sand particles are the larger particles, silt particles are medium-sized, and clay particles are the smallest. And you can kind of tell what kind of particles are dominating your soil if you feel it. Sand is going to be your grittier soil. Clay is going to be a really smooth soil. Silt is a little bit in between. And those particles have a lot to do with our soil texture. When we're talking about soil texture, I like to think about baking. Because when you're baking, you're taking a lot of times the same elements, say like flour, water, and yeast, and making different things because you're using those elements in different quantities. So you can make pizza dough, you can make a bread, you can make a croissant, and you're using all of the same ingredients, but you're getting very different results. Soil texture is the same way. So we use the same ingredients, but we can have a more clayey soil or silty or sandy. If you have a good mix of all of those things, that's where you get a loamy soil. When we're talking about soil structure, we go back to those particles. Particles clump together to form soil aggregates, and soil aggregates come together to form soil structure. In your soil structure, you've got a couple of options. You can have a well-structured soil or a poorly structured soil. Your well-structured soil is going to have a lot more room between those soil aggregates. That's what we call pores. So in those larger pores, there's room for air and water and nutrients to all be stored. And in a poorly structured soil, the pores are smaller, and so there's less room for the air, water, and nutrients to be stored. And it also causes a lot of times the water to remain up near the surface. And so that's what we see in like compacted soil. So it's important when you're working with soil on your land or in your garden to know what kind of soils you have, and there are a couple different elements to this. One of the things that you can do is you can look at a soils map. There are some great resources through the NRCS, the Web Soil Survey, where you can pull up soils maps of your property, which will tell you things like the type of soil. It will tell you a little bit about your soil texture, how well it drains water, farmland classification. So, like if it's really fertile, it can let you know that stuff. And I can send out a link in our follow-up email to Web Soil Survey for folks who aren't familiar with that. And then another thing you can do for a more zoomed in look at your soil is to get a soils test. Where I work at the Upper Willamette Soil and Water Conservation District, we offer soil testing. We do it at cost, so just the cost of what it takes us to get soil samples processed through the lab is what we collect from people. It's $65 per sample. You can bring those into us in a quart Ziploc bag. That's about the right amount of soil. And what we do is we receive that from you, we send it off to the lab, and then we get results back. We take the technical results, we send those to you, but we also give you a little bit of a report that breaks it down, and you just get basic information about soil nutrients like potassium, calcium, phosphorus, nitrogen, as well as the percent organic matter in your soil and what the pH is, and that can all help you with your management strategies. So when we're talking about said management strategies, I like to come back to this slide because what we want out of soil is a well-structured soil. And so when we're talking about our management strategies, we are looking to either we have a soil that's already got a good structure and we want to maintain that, or we have a compacted or a poorly structured soil and we want to restore it back to being well structured. In general, there are 5 guiding principles that we like to use to improve soil health. The first is to keep living roots growing in your soil. The second is to keep soils covered. The third is to maximize diversity. The fourth is to minimize soil disturbance. And the fifth is to integrate animals when possible. So that first one, keep living roots growing. Living roots do a lot for the soil. They can physically stabilize it. They keep it biologically active with those microorganisms, and then they can also restore nutrients to it. This one's a pretty simple concept. It's basically anything that keeps living plants in your ground. It can be annual or perennial. You can be talking about ground covers or cover cropping or pollinator gardens, just anything that gives live plants into the soil. The second principle is to keep your soil covered. What this does is it protects the physical structure of the soil from outside elements like rain, wind, and temperature fluctuation. And when we're protecting our soils from those elements, it also protects the biological components. So again, that microbiome, which is so important to a healthy soil. We just talked about living plants in your soil, and that's a great way to keep soil covered, but it's not the only way. You can also keep it covered with dead plants. So this is something like if you have an annual garden and those plants go dormant or die at the end of the season, instead of pulling them up right away, you can leave them on the ground to keep that soil covered. And also cover with mulch, with compost applications, cardboard, newspapers, tarps, pretty much anything that separates uh, excuse me, pretty much anything that keeps your bare soil covered up. For composting, it can be used to keep your soil covered, and it can also be an important soil amendment. Over time, it can improve your soil structure and the ability to hold water and air. It can improve the microbiome activity and help improve nutrients over and help improve nutrients. You can make compost at home or buy it. It's available in tons of spaces, right? Nurseries and garden centers. You can buy it in bulk from places like Lane Forest Product. It is important to apply the correct amount of compost because it can be over applied. This is where those soil tests come in handy. So say if you tested last spring and you found that you were low in phosphorus and then you applied a compost that was high in phosphorus, it would be important to test again the following spring to see if you are still low or if you have the correct amount or if you're actually high in it so that you're not over applying because applying too much compost into a soil can put too many nutrients into it, which can stunt plant growth and create pollution. This is just a fun little graphic about how to layer when you're composting. If you're composting at home, I think composting gets overcomplicated a lot of times, but in its most basic, it's just managing a carbon to nitrogen ratio. So you want about 30% carbon materials and 70% nitrogen materials when you're putting them in your compost bin. So carbon things can be anything from like sawdust and wood chips and twigs to leaves and certain fabrics like cotton, cardboard, paper. And then pretty much for the nitrogen, you can have your kitchen scraps or your grass clippings, animal manure if you keep chickens or you have neighbors who keep chickens or goats, stuff like that. And these are just some examples of at-home composting systems that you can utilize. That one was hand built. It's a little more, it's pretty nice, pretty fancy, but then you can also just do hardware cloth cylinders work as well. You can buy things from stores that work. The third principle is to maximize diversity. When you have a diverse plant life in your soil, you also have a diverse soil microbiome. Different microorganisms have different needs and preferences. And sorry, different microorganisms have different needs and preferences. And when we cultivate diversity in our gardens or yards around the property that we're living on, we support a diverse microbial community. This is just a fun little periodic table of cover crops that depicts diversity of crops by type and function. So we've got our cool season plants and our warm season plants. You've got grasses and broadleafs and legumes. Um, it also shows the diversity of crops that can be planted and terminated over the course of a season. So you've got a little note on here for some of these that says WK, which means winter killed. So those are cover crops that will terminate themselves. And this is a fun table to look at when we're talking about farming, but it doesn't even scratch the surface when we're talking about native plants. So you can get so much more diversity than even this. Diversity can be integrated in a variety of ways and at a variety of scales. At the smallest scale, it can be integrated through the interplanting and companion planting. And that can be done on just on a really small scale where your plants are like right up next to each other. On a slightly larger scale, it can be integrated through strip cropping. Um, and at the largest scale, we can see it in crop rotations across fields, so where crops are being rotated by season or by year. It's also important to note that the removal of invasives helps us with soil diversity. So one of the invasive qualities of invasive species is that they crowd out a variety of our native species, which results in less overall diversity. This can have impacts on the diversity of the soil microbial community, like we already talked about. So through our efforts to remove invasive species, we can create space for a more diversified plant community and have positive impacts on our soil. The fourth principle is to minimize disturbance. Disturbance like tilling can give us a setback on all the progress that we made in the three previous principles because it does things like breaks up living roots, it disturbs soil habitat and food sources for soil microbes. It oxidizes soil carbon and nitrogen, which releases it back into the air, and it impacts the soil's ability to hold moisture. Some ways that you can minimize disturbance or like lower the amount of tillage that you're doing is to plant perennials so that you don't have to till up an annual garden every year. To use shallow tillage systems where you're not going in so deep, so you're just tilling up the surface layer, or to use seasonal tillage systems where you're tilling based on like weather and environmental conditions, so you're not tilling up when it's super wet, which is going to compact your soil more. There are also zero tillage systems like raised beds and sheet mulching and integrating like the pulling or spraying of weeds rather than tilling them up. And the fifth principle is to integrate animals whenever possible. Um, Animals have a long history with soil, right? We've had wildlife on the earth forever. And what animals do when they're interacting with nature and with soil is a lot of nutrient cycling. So they bring nutrients back into the soil and that improves plant health. So just like it would in the wild, integrating animals can help with nutrient cycling in the garden or yard, and improve plant health. And this can look like keeping animals. I think we've all seen the cute pictures of duck gardens. I have one of them on here. And those are fun. It's fun to integrate chickens or even small ruminants like goats or sheep when you're able to. But if we're being honest, animals are challenging and messy and sometimes are really hard to keep in garden or yard systems. So you can also integrate animals by doing things like using a manure-based compost or worm castings or, a worm compost tea. Those are all great ways to also do um, this last principle. So that was my presentation.